Most people believe saving your first $100,000 is just a financial milestone, a nice round number, something to feel proud of for a moment before moving on. But that belief misses what really happens at this stage, because reaching $100,000 quietly changes how money behaves in your life. Before this point, everything feels heavy. Every dollar you save feels like it comes directly from effort, discipline, and sacrifice. Progress feels slow, almost disappointing. You can go months doing everything right and still feel like nothing is happening. This is why so many people quit early. They assume the lack of visible progress means the system isn't working, when in reality this phase is exactly how wealth is built. What most people don't realize is that the first $100,000 isn't about the money itself. It's about who you become while earning it. This is the phase where habits are forged, where delayed gratification becomes normal, where saving stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like control. Even if your account balance doesn't impress anyone else, something important is already shifting beneath the surface. At this stage, nearly all growth comes from you, not your investments. Your savings rate matters more than your returns. Whether the market goes up or down feels almost irrelevant, because the real driver is how consistently you add new money. This is why it feels exhausting. You're doing the heavy lifting, and your portfolio is still too small to noticeably help you. But something subtle begins to happen as you approach that six-figure mark. You start paying closer attention, not because you're obsessed, but because the numbers finally feel real. A 5% or 10% return is no longer abstract. You can see it. You can measure it. And even though it may not replace your income yet, it no longer feels meaningless. This is also the point where your relationship with spending begins to change. Not out of fear, but awareness. You start recognizing trade-offs more clearly. A purchase isn't just money leaving your account, it's potential future growth being interrupted. That awareness doesn't make life smaller, it makes decisions clearer. And while it may not feel dramatic in the moment, this is where the foundation locks into place. Because once you cross this threshold, the process no longer feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill. The momentum is still slow, but it's no longer invisible. For the first time, it feels like the system is beginning to respond. This is why the first $100,000 matters so much more than most people think. Not because it makes you rich, but because it marks the exact point where effort starts turning into momentum. Once you cross the $100,000 mark, the numbers begin to behave differently. Not because the market suddenly changes, but because scale finally starts to matter. This is the point where compounding stops being a theory and starts becoming something you can actually feel. When your portfolio was small, even strong returns barely moved the needle. A few $100s here or there was easy to dismiss. It didn't change your lifestyle. It didn't change your options. And because of that, it was hard to stay emotionally invested in the process. But after $100,000, the same percentage returns start producing dollar amounts that demand your attention. A modest market return can now add several $1,000s in a single year without you lifting a finger. That's not life-changing money yet, but it's no longer trivial. It's enough to cover months of expenses, erase mistakes, or accelerate your savings in ways that weren't possible before. For the first time, your money is contributing meaningfully alongside you, instead of quietly lagging behind. This is where motivation changes form. Earlier, discipline was fueled by willpower. You saved because you told yourself you had to. Now discipline becomes reinforced by feedback. You save because you can see the results. Watching your balance grow faster than your contributions creates a loop that's hard to ignore. Progress becomes visible, and visible progress is addictive in the best possible way. Another shift happens beneath the surface. Risk starts to feel different. When you were starting out, every dollar felt fragile. A loss felt personal. But with a six-figure foundation beneath you, volatility feels less threatening. You begin to understand that short-term fluctuations don't matter as much when the long-term trend is working in your favor. This doesn't make you reckless. It makes you patient. Your time horizon also stretches. You stop thinking in months and start thinking in decades. Decisions become calmer. Market drops feel like interruptions instead of disasters. And because your portfolio is now large enough to recover and grow at the same time, fear slowly gives way to confidence. Perhaps the most important change is this. Money starts giving you options before it gives you income. You're not financially free yet, but you're no longer financially fragile. Unexpected expenses don't derail you. Opportunities don't immediately feel out of reach. You can afford to think instead of react. This stage is where many people notice a strange contradiction. They don't feel rich, but they feel stable. And that stability quietly unlocks better decisions. You're no longer forced to optimize every move for survival. You can optimize for growth. And once that happens, the pace of progress no longer feels random. It feels intentional. By the time you've saved your first $100,000, something important has already happened that most people never notice. You've proven consistency. Not once, not accidentally, over years. And that consistency quietly puts you in a different category than the average saver. This is where opportunity begins to show up more often. Not because the world suddenly offers you more chances, but because you're finally positioned to see and use them. When you were living paycheck to paycheck, every decision had a narrow margin for error. Stability mattered more than upside. Safety mattered more than growth. Now, that balance starts to tilt. You begin to notice that money doesn't just grow, it creates flexibility. You can afford to be selective. You can walk away from situations that don't make sense long term. You can take calculated risks that would have been impossible before. Even if you don't act on these opportunities right away, simply having the option changes how you think. This is also where your habits quietly compound alongside your money. You're no longer forcing yourself to save. It's automatic. You're no longer guessing whether an expense is worth it. You already know. That mental clarity reduces friction. Decisions that once drained energy now happen effortlessly. Another subtle shift occurs with patience. Market noise starts to fade. Headlines lose their power. You understand that temporary drops don't undo years of discipline. In fact, you may even welcome them, knowing that downturns reward those who are prepared rather than those who panic. This emotional distance is one of the most underrated advantages of reaching this stage. Your identity begins to shift as well. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to get ahead and start seeing yourself as someone who is already on a path. That change doesn't make you complacent, it makes you strategic. You focus less on shortcuts and more on sustainability. Interestingly, this is also the stage where many people slow down, and that's not necessarily a mistake. Because once the foundation is built, you don't need to sprint forever. Momentum takes over some of the work. Growth becomes steadier, less stressful, and more predictable. You may not notice it day to day, but you're now moving at a different speed than before. Not faster in effort, faster in results. And from this point forward, the gap between you and those who never reached this milestone begins to widen naturally. What makes the first $100,000 a true turning point isn't the number itself, it's the way progress finally starts feeding on itself. At this stage, growth is no longer dependent solely on how hard you push. The system you built begins to assist you in ways it never could before. This is where compounding quietly takes the lead, not in a dramatic overnight sense, but in a steady, undeniable way. Your portfolio starts generating gains that rival what you're able to contribute in a year. Eventually, those gains begin to exceed them. When that happens, the math feels different. You're no longer racing time, you're working with it. What's powerful about this phase is how calm it feels. There's less urgency, less pressure to make perfect decisions. You understand that time and consistency now matter more than intensity. Small mistakes don't derail you. Missed opportunities don't haunt you. The path is wide enough to absorb them. This is also the point where wealth starts becoming personal. Not in terms of luxury, but in alignment. You can structure your life around long-term priorities instead of short-term needs. You invest with intention. You spend with awareness. And most importantly, you stop measuring progress by comparison and start measuring it by independence. Many people assume the second 100,000 or the first million arrives because returns suddenly skyrocket. In reality, it arrives because behavior stabilizes. You've already learned how to save, how to invest, how to ignore noise, and how to stay consistent through uncertainty. Those skills don't disappear. They compound just like your money. This is why people who reach this milestone often say the next one comes faster. Not because it's easier, but because the hardest part is already behind them. The discipline is built, the habits are automatic, the emotional resistance is gone. And while reaching $100,000 won't instantly change your lifestyle, it permanently changes your trajectory. From this point forward, growth is no longer fragile. It's resilient. It can slow down, speed up, or pause, but it doesn't reset. That's the real turning point. Not the balance on the screen, but the moment when money stops feeling like something you chase and starts feeling like something that quietly works for you.